with family and friends. I am so happy to be back home. I am so happy to be back in the city where I first felt the taste of freedom. Right here in this city. This city. I have learned to put God first in everything that I do. May we pray? Lord, it's your son Jermaine, Lord. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for my laying down last night and for my early rising this morning. That it was not my cooling board and it was not my winding sheet. Lord, thank you for bringing me home to family and friends. But Lord, it is not for me that I pray. I pray, Lord, for those who are still in bondage, in that land of bondage. Those who suffer the lash and the whip each and every day. Lord, you know how they suffer. You know how my mother, if she is still alive, saw her children be torn away from her and sold to she knows not where. Not only her, Lord, but all those others in the South. Lord, I thank you for watching over my family in my absence and for bringing me back to my city, to my church, and to my family. And all the saints say amen. 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 I do not know how history may view me. It may be crime, it may be kind, or it may be cruel. But one thing I do know, history will look upon you, the citizens of Syracuse, and say that you stood for liberty and justice. Last October 1st, the memorable day that will always stand true, you stood with us, the colored population of the city, and you freed a man who had been living amongst you for 4 or 5 years, Jerry. Regardless of what those despots in Washington had said, you said that liberty is more important than the law. So give yourselves a hand. Now, I see many of you that I do know in attendance this evening. Mr. Bates, Mr. May. But I see many that I have not made the acquaintance of. So if I do not know you, that means you do not know me. So let me tell you just a little bit about the man who stands before you this evening. June 29, 1852. I was born a slave in Manscoles Creek, Tennessee, 16 miles northwest of Nashville. And when I was born a slave in Manscoles Creek, Tennessee, they didn't call me the Reverend Jermaine Wesley Loguen. They called me Jarm. They called me Jarm. Nothing more, nothing less. They called me Jarm. To tell you truly about myself, I must tell you about my mother. You see, my mother was a pure African woman with skin that was jet black and hair curled closely to her head. My mother told me that when she was 6 or 7 years of age, that she remembered living in the free state of Ohio with a Mr. McCoy. Now, she does not recall how she came to live with Mr. McCoy, but she told me that she remembered living free in the free state of Ohio. My mother told me that when she was 6 or 7 years old, she was playing out of eyesight and earshot of the McCoy residence. And she told me that a bad man, he drove up a wagon onto the McCoy residence. And he jumped out of the wagon and he grabbed my mother about her waist and put his hand over her mouth so that she could not scream. My mother told me that the bad man picked her up and got back into the wagon and sat her on his lap. My mother told me that as her eyes adjusted to the darkness of the wagon, she could see and she could hear other little colored children in the back of the wagon whimpering and crying. My mother told me that the bad man told the teamster driver, the other man that was driving the horses, to go home. And they began to make their way south. And as they made their way south, they crossed the river. And to this day, I believe it was the Ohio River. And as they crossed the river, they began to sell each one of those children for as much money as they could. Amen. My mother told me that eventually she was sold to the Loguen family, L-O-G-U-E, of Mansco's Creek, Tennessee. Now, again, my mother was only 6 or 7 years old, and she told me that in her first interview with the Logues, they began to smile at her, and they began to coax her and just play with her. And she began to plead with them. She began to ask them, I want to go home. She was only 6 or 7 years old. She said, I want to go home. My mother told me that their smiles turned into frowns. And one of the Logues, that she's not sure which, grabbed the whip off of the wall and began to beat her about her head and shoulders and began to curse her and told her that she should never again tell anyone that she had been kidnapped from Ohio and brought and sold to them. My mother told me that in freedom, in Ohio, her name had been Jane. But they changed her name from Jane to Cherry, so that if anyone came looking for Jane, they wouldn't expect it to be Cherry. And this, ladies and gentlemen, began the process of metamorphing, of transforming a child made in the image and the likeness of the God who sits high and looks low, transforming her into a thing, into property, into chattel. My mother told me that once she became of childbearing age, the youngest of the Loguen family, there was Granny, the widowed mother, and 3 sons, Manasseh, Carnes, and David Logue. The youngest of the Logue brothers, David Logue, took her not as his wife, but as her mistress, and with her had several children. You see, I stand before you this evening. David Logue was my master, my owner, and my father. My master, my owner, and my father. But I would not tell you that I was meanly mistreated in my first 13, 14 years. What is your date of birth? Your date of birth?
July 7th.
July 7th. I cannot tell you my date of birth. You see, when I was born, they didn't write it down. I celebrated on February 5th to suit myself. But they didn't write my date of birth down, because if they write a slave's date of birth down, then he will become thinking of himself as a man, as a human being. So I cannot tell you the year, I cannot tell you the day that I was born. But when I was 13 or 14 years of age, I was sold to my uncle, Manasseh, David's brother, who had moved to the southern part of Tennessee near the Tombigbee River. Because David, being a drinking man, David had faced financial ruin. And David had to sell all of his property. And he sold me, my mother, my brothers and sisters to my uncle, Manasseh. And when I was 13 or 14, that was the first time that I was used as a field hand. You see, while I lived with David, I slept in his bed. I ate at his table. I called his mother Granny. And they told me, John, you shall never be meanly misused. John, you shall be set free when you're 21 years of age. John, you shall never taste the lash. But I ask each and every one of you, what is a promise from a slave owner to property, to chattel, to a thing? And I answer, it is nothing. When he reached that financial ruin, he sold all of us to pay off his debt. I could tell you many incidences that happened while I was living with my Uncle Manasseh. He also made that good old Tennessee whiskey. And he drank, him and his wife drank more than they sold. And I learned to make it also. But I decided that I wanted to be free. And when I turned about 21 years of age, approximately 1834, me and my best friend, John Farney, we decided that we would take a break for freedom or we would die in the trying. And so we stole my master's best horses. And we made our way from Tennessee up through Kentucky into Indiana. And because neither one of us had ever been to school, we got lost. We didn't know. But we met a man in Indiana. And he told us, follow the North Star. And that will lead you to freedom. Well, we spent the winter of 1834, lost and cold, but Native Americans, Quakers, and Black Americans helped us get through that winter. And early part of 1835, we made our way to Detroit, and we crossed over from Detroit into Windsor, Canada. And when I knew we were in Canaan land, in Canada, I knelt and I kissed the ground. Because now I knew no man could claim me as their property. But I tell you, up in Canada, I learned to be a man. I learned to work for my own wages. I became a property owner. I bought property in St. Catharines. But once you have tasted the sweet taste of liberty, you want it for others. And I decided to come back into the United States. And I lived right over in Rochester, New York, and worked at the Rochester House Hotel. And it was there that a man, I was only 23, 24 years of age, but a man saw more in me than I saw in myself. The Reverend E.P. Rogers. And he encouraged me to go to the Oneida Institute in nearby Whitesboro, New York. And when I was in the Oneida Institute, it was the first time that I fell and claimed religion. And I joined the AME Zion Church in Utica, New York, Hope Chapel. And I decided then and there that I would dedicate myself to serving God and serving my fellow man. It was also in Utica that I met the light of my life. I was teaching Sunday school at the AME Zion Church, and Miss Caroline Storm was one of my students. And she fell in love with me, and I fell in love with her. And in 1840, we were married at her parents' house in Bustine, New York. Now I moved here to this city in 1841, but I didn't stay long because I knew I had decided that I wanted to teach and I wanted to preach. And I was assigned to a church in Bath, New York. And after Bath, the AME Zion Church. And I taught Monday through Friday, and I preached on Sundays. But it was in Bath when I decided to go to Cortland that I had a change in my life that put me on a trajectory that has changed everything that I have done. I went to Cortland in 1844, and I was looking for funds to finish building my Amy Zion Church in Bath. And I met Mr. John Thomas, and he arranged for me to speak to the congregations in Cortland. With Mr. Thomas's support, I have met that model man, Mr. Garrett Smith. I met Samuel Ringgold Ward. I have met so many men of letters, and they have seen more in me and encouraged me to speak out on that thing called slavery. And that is what I am dedicating my life to do. Now, I have lived here off and on since then because I also was stationed in Ithaca. I was stationed in Troy. And when I was stationed in Troy in September of 1850, when those despots in Washington passed that fugitive slave bill, a law that is despicable, a law that has no value whatsoever for man. When they passed that bill, my friends, I was teaching and living in Troy, my friends said, Reverend Loguen, now because you are an escaped slave yourself and you refuse to let anyone buy your freedom for you. Because see, unlike my friend, Frederick Douglass, whose friends from England bought his freedom, I said, I will not allow any man to pay for my freedom. My freedom is a God-given right. I owe no man for my freedom. They said, now, Reverend Loguen, because you have declared this, you must come back to Syracuse because now you are in danger of being re-enslaved and captured. So to suit my friends and to suit my family, I came back here. In September, when they passed that law, the citizens of Syracuse weren't familiar with what it said. That law, the fugitive slave law said that if any man, woman, or child had taken their freedom and made their way from the south to the north, anybody who wanted to could claim that they were their property. And the person accused of being an escaped slave could not testify in their own defense. That law said that if you refused to help a marshal in recapturing someone claimed to be an escaped slave, that you could be fined $1,000 or put in prison for 6 months. That law said that if you aided and abetted someone who was accused of being an escaped slave, you could be fined $1,000 or put into prison for 6 months. That law says that if someone is taken in front of a commissioner and the commissioner finds that the person that was put on trial was not an escaped slave, they would be paid $5. But if the commissioner found that the person who was put on trial was an escaped slave, they would be paid $10. That law was an abomination. And we, you and I, the citizens of Syracuse, we met on October 4th, 1851, and we said in a meeting, some 473 strong, right here at Market Hall, we met and we debated. And to your righteousness, 460 of you voted to make Syracuse an open city. An open city, meaning that if any man, woman, or child had escaped slavery and made their way to Syracuse, you would not return that person to slavery. I was proud of you that night, Syracuse. I was proud of you. In a speech that I made, I had said that I had lived here for many years, and my children had been born here. But if despots came to re-enslave me, I would meet their force as becomes a man. And I meant that. And the test came last October. October 1st, 1851, around noon, federal marshals from Canandaigua, Auburn, Rochester, and Syracuse, accompanied by the local police, arrested our fellow citizen, Jerry, who had lived here for 4 or 5 years and was working as a barrel maker, as a cooper. Now, when they first arrested him, they told him that the charge was slavery before they put the manacles on him. So Jerry didn't put up any kind of resistance. But when they got him to Commissioner Sabine's office, that's when they told him that he was being arrested under the Fugitive Slave Bill. Now, once Jerry, who was sitting at the table, began to understand that he had been arrested under the Fugitive Slave Bill, he became angry, he became agitated. Now, we, the Liberty Party, we were meeting over at the Congregational Church, and we decided to adjourn our meeting because once it was learned that someone had been arrested under the Fugitive Slave Bill, by prearranged signal, church bells began ringing all over Syracuse. And we, the 13 members of the Vigilance Committee, we met. And Jerry, once we decided that, okay, let's go to Commissioner Sabine's office. And Jerry was sitting there, and he was agitated, he was angry. And once there was a lull in the proceedings, Jerry, he climbed over the table. And he actually, even though he had manacles on him, he actually got outside the door. And we stood and we closed the door so those despots could not follow him. And he made his way down to the streets of Syracuse. But because he had manacles on, he couldn't run fast. And they recaptured him and they put him in the jail. The Vigilance Committee met. Brother May, if you remember, you said, if anyone gets hurt, please let it be one of us. But the black members of the committee said, if you will not fight to free Jerry, stand aside and let us fight to free Jerry. But you, the citizens, you made me proud. Later that evening, some 2,500 of you formed in the streets of this beloved city. And we freed Jerry from his prison. We freed Jerry. We took a battering ram and knocked down the door to the prison where Jerry was being held. One of the federal marshals, he pow, 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 he shot into the audience. He shot into those who had gathered. When we saw no one had been injured, no one had been hurt, it made us more determined to free Jerry ourselves. We went to the back room where Jerry was being held, and the marshals now seen there was too many of us. They said, no, don't hurt us. Just take Jerry and leave us be. And we did. We took Jerry from his prison cell, and we hoisted him upon our shoulders, and we went into the streets of Syracuse, and we chanted, Jerry is free! Jerry is free! Huh. It was a great moment. It was a great moment. But citizens, to all great moments there are consequences. Once Jerry was free, we knew that the press and the government would do all they could to make examples of us. So my family, they begged me, they pleaded with me to leave. And that is why 2 or 3 days after freeing Jerry, I left my beloved Syracuse. And I made my way to St. Catharines. And again stayed with my friend, Mr. Hiram Wilson. But now I am home. And I'm home to stay. And I told my friends and family at the time, it shocked my manhood to have left in the first place. And I am through with running. Come what may, I was indicted. I will face that indictment. And I told them, I wrote a letter to Governor Washington Hunt. And I told him, if you will try me on being a part of the Jerry riot, as you calling it, we call it the Jerry Rescue. If you will try me on that charge alone, I will gladly return to the United States. But if you try me on being an escaped slave, I will not face that charge because I do not belong to anyone. I was born free in heart and in spirit. So now, glory be to God, I am home. And friends, I will not leave you again. I am here to stay and to put my strength to use to wipe out slavery any and everywhere that I can. We are here at this donation party, and I am embarrassed, but I am honored that you would see the value in the work that we are doing over at our house at the corner of East Genesee and Pine for our escaped brethren and sisters. The monies that you're giving me this evening will not only go for my family support, Caroline, and my children, but it'll also go to help those. I am